fiancé pushed the disabled billionaire, until the maid risked everything to save him. Hey! I wasn't going to tell this story, but I can't stop thinking about it. What you're about to hear happened on a private dock in Miami, in front of 200 wedding guests, champagne glasses still in their hands. A man in a wheelchair. A woman in a red dress who smiled right before she did it. And a maid nobody even looked at, until she was the only one who moved. Stay with me. Because what happens next isn't just about a man falling into the water. It's about who really jumps in when it matters. Hey everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight, and what country do you call home? I love seeing where this community reaches. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones I've ever told you. A story about money, betrayal, and a kindness so quiet that almost nobody noticed it until it was too late. I promise you, there is a moment in this story that will stay with you long after the video ends. So grab something warm to drink, get comfortable, and let's begin. Nobody at that party thought the wheelchair meant weakness. They were wrong to think anything at all, because the man in it was worth more than every yacht in that Miami marina combined. Richard Holloway was 52 years old, and for the last 3 years, he had lived his life from a wheelchair. A car accident on a rain-soaked highway outside Naples, Florida had taken the use of his legs and, for a long time, his will to keep going. Before that night, Richard had been a man who built things, a shipping empire that started with one rusted barge his father left him and grew into a fleet that moved cargo across 3 oceans. He was the kind of man photographers loved, magazines profiled, and strangers envied from a distance. After the accident, most of that attention faded. People are strange that way. They admire strength until it looks different than they expect, and then they quietly step back. But not everyone stepped back. 2 years after the accident, Richard met Vanessa Cole at a charity gala in South Beach. She was 34, stunning in the way that made entire rooms turn their heads, and she had a laugh that made Richard forget, just for a moment, that he hadn't stood up on his own in 2 years. She told him she didn't see the wheelchair. She told him she saw him. He believed her. God help him, he believed every word. Tonight was their engagement celebration. A lavish evening aboard the Holloway family's private dock in Coconut Grove, string lights strung between palm trees, a live quartet playing somewhere near the champagne fountain, and nearly 200 guests in tuxedos and gowns celebrating a wedding that was still 4 months away. Richard sat near the edge of the dock in his wheelchair, watching the water ripple gold under the string lights, and for the first time in years, he let himself feel something close to happy. He didn't notice the maid at first. Almost nobody did. Her name was Maya Reyes. 26 years old, 5'4", with dark curly hair pulled back into a tight bun and a purple uniform 2 sizes too big because the catering company hadn't bothered to measure her before the event. She had been hired through a temp agency just 3 days earlier, brought in along with a dozen other staff to serve champagne and canapes to people who would never remember her face. Maya didn't mind being invisible. In her experience, invisible people saw everything. She noticed, for instance, that Vanessa Cole's smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at Richard. She noticed that Vanessa checked her phone constantly, always turning slightly away before reading the messages. She noticed a man in a grey suit, not a guest, not staff, someone who didn't belong anywhere on the guest list Maya had glanced at that morning, standing near the yacht, watching Vanessa from a distance like they shared a secret neither wanted spoken aloud. Maya told herself it wasn't her business. She was here to pour champagne and disappear by midnight, collect her check, and go home to her mother's apartment in Little Havana, where the rent was due in 6 days and the refrigerator held exactly 4 eggs and half a carton of milk. She had bigger problems than a rich man's love life. But something about the way Vanessa looked at Richard, like a woman measuring a stranger for a coffin, made the back of Maya's neck go cold every single time she passed their table. At exactly 8:47 that evening, Richard Holloway asked his fiancée to walk with him along the edge of the dock, away from the noise, so they could watch the sunset over the water together, just the two of them. Vanessa smiled that smile again. The one that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, darling," she said. "Let's go somewhere quiet." Maya was standing 30 feet away, refilling a tray of champagne glasses, when she saw them move toward the far edge of the dock, the part without railing, where the wood met open water and the current ran deep and fast beneath the surface. She didn't know why her hands started shaking. She didn't know why every instinct in her body told her to put down the tray and follow. She just knew she couldn't look away. The sun was dropping behind the Miami skyline in long orange streaks, and for a moment, it looked like something out of a movie, the wealthy couple silhouetted against the water, the wheelchair's polished chrome catching the last light of day. Richard reached for Vanessa's hand. "I know these last few years haven't been easy for you," he said quietly. "Loving a man who can't dance with you at his own wedding. I want you to know I see that. I see everything you've given up to be with me." Vanessa's eyes glistened, and for one brief second, Richard thought he saw something real in them. "You have no idea what I've given up," she said softly. There was something strange in the way she said it. Something Richard, in his happiness, didn't catch. But Maya, standing near enough now to see but far enough to remain part of the background, did. She saw Vanessa glance over Richard's shoulder toward the man in the grey suit, who had drifted closer to the water's edge, close enough now that Maya could see he was holding something, a phone, recording. Maya's stomach turned to ice. "Richard," Vanessa said, her voice suddenly different, colder, like a mask sliding off. "I need you to know something before we go any further with this wedding." Richard blinked. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" "I need you to know that some people were never built to spend their whole lives pushing another person's wheelchair." The words hit him like a slap. Richard opened his mouth to respond, to ask what she meant, to salvage whatever was happening in front of him, and that was the exact moment Vanessa placed both hands on the back of his wheelchair and shoved. It happened in less than 2 seconds. The chair tipped forward off the unguarded edge of the dock, and Richard Halloway, shipping magnate, father, a man who had once commanded a fleet of 40 vessels, went into the water without a sound loud enough to carry over the string quartet still playing 40 feet away. For one horrifying instant, nobody moved. Vanessa stood at the edge, her red dress bright against the darkening sky, her face arranged into something that looked, to anyone watching from a distance, exactly like shock. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough now for heads to turn. "Oh my God, he fell. Someone help him, he fell in." But she didn't move toward the water. She stepped back from it. Maya was already running. She dropped the tray of champagne glasses. She'd remember the sound of them shattering on the dock for the rest of her life, and sprinted toward the water's edge, kicking off her shoes as she ran, her mind empty of everything except the image of a man in a wheelchair sinking beneath dark water with no way to swim, no way to kick, no way to save himself. "Somebody call 911, she screamed, and dove. The water was colder than she expected, and darker, the last of the sunset barely reaching beneath the surface. She opened her eyes anyway, searching, her lungs already burning, until she saw him, Richard, tangled in the wreckage of his own wheelchair, sinking, his suit jacket ballooning around him like something out of a nightmare, his eyes wide with a terror that no amount of money could have prepared him for. Maya grabbed him under the arms and kicked with everything she had. He was heavier than she expected. The chair's metal frame had wrapped around one leg, and for a sickening moment she thought they would both go down together, that this would be the last thing either of them ever did. But somewhere in the chaos, some instinct older than fear took over, and Maya twisted, wrenched his leg free of the tangled chair, and kicked upward with a strength she didn't know she had. They broke the surface together, gasping, "Help me!" Maya screamed toward the dock, toward the party guests now gathering at the edge, phones raised, some recording instead of helping. "Somebody help me pull him up." For a moment, one long, terrible moment, nobody moved. And Vanessa Cole, standing at the front of the crowd in her red dress, simply watched. It was a security guard, finally, who dropped to his knees on the dock and reached down into the water, and behind him, 2 more staff members finally broke from their frozen shock and helped haul Richard's soaked, gasping body up onto the wood. Maya climbed up after him, her purple uniform clinging to her skin, her hair plastered across her face, her chest heaving. She didn't wait to catch her breath. She dropped to her knees beside Richard, checking his airway, tilting his head, doing exactly what she'd learned years ago in a CPR class she'd taken for a job she never got. "Sir, can you hear me? Richard, stay with me, look at me." Richard coughed up a lungful of water and gasped, his eyes wild, disoriented, searching the faces above him until they landed on Vanessa's. And that was when everything changed. Because Richard Holloway, still soaked, still shaking, still fighting to breathe, looked directly at his fiancée and said, in a voice that carried across the entire silent dock, "You pushed me." The words dropped like a stone into still water. Every conversation around them died. The string quartet stopped mid-note. 200 guests in tuxedos and gowns turned to stare at the woman in red, who stood frozen at the edge of the dock with her hand pressed to her mouth. "Richard, sweetheart, you fell, you were leaning too far and you fell, I tried to." "You pushed me," Richard said again, quieter this time, but somehow louder in the silence. "I felt your hands. I felt you push." "That's insane," Vanessa said, and her voice cracked in a way that might have been convincing if Maya hadn't been staring directly at her, hadn't seen the flicker of calculation behind her eyes, the split-second recalculation of a woman realizing her plan had gone catastrophically wrong. He's confused, he almost drowned, he doesn't know what he's saying. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Richard's voice was gaining strength now, fury burning through the shock. "I felt your hands on my chair. I felt you shove me into the water and I watched you step back instead of helping." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been recording in shock now recorded with purpose. Somewhere in the back, a woman gasped audibly. Maya, still kneeling on the wet dock, still catching her breath, watched the man in the grey suit, the one she'd noticed earlier, the one holding a phone, quietly slip backward through the crowd toward the parking area, his recording device now nowhere in sight. She grabbed the arm of the nearest security guard. "That man, in the grey suit, by the hedges, don't let him leave. He was filming this. He was here before it happened." The guard, still shaken from what he'd witnessed, hesitated only a second before moving toward the retreating figure. Vanessa's composure cracked further. "This is ridiculous, I don't know who that is, Richard, please, you know me, you know I would never." "I don't think I know you at all," Richard said. An older woman near the front of the crowd, silver hair, sharp eyes, dressed in deep emerald, stepped forward. Maya recognized her from earlier introductions as Eleanor Cross, Richard's longtime attorney and one of his oldest friends. "Richard," Eleanor said carefully, "I think we need to get you to a hospital, and I think we need to get the police here immediately. Both of those things can happen at the same time." Richard nodded weakly, still staring at Vanessa as though seeing her, really seeing her, for the very first time. "Eleanor, get her off my property." "Richard, please." Vanessa's voice broke into something closer to panic now, the mask fully gone. "You don't understand what you're doing, if I leave now. If you leave now, that will be the smartest decision you've made all night," Eleanor said coldly, already motioning to 2 more security staff. As the chaos organized itself around them, paramedics arriving, guests being ushered back, Vanessa being escorted, still protesting, toward the parking area, Richard reached out and grabbed Maya's wrist with a wet, trembling hand. "You," he said. "You're the one who jumped in." Maya, suddenly aware of how she must look, soaked uniform, hair a disaster, kneeling on a dock in front of 200 of the wealthiest people in Miami, nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." "Why?" His voice cracked on the single word. "Why did you jump when nobody else moved?" Maya looked down at her hands, at the dock, at anything except his face, because she wasn't entirely sure herself how to answer a question that big. "Because somebody had to," she finally said. "And I guess I couldn't stand there and watch." Richard Holloway stared at her for a long moment, water still dripping from his hair, his whole world rearranging itself in real time. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya. Maya Reyes." He nodded slowly, filing the name away like something precious. I'm not going to forget this, Maya Reyes. She had no idea, in that moment, just how true those words would turn out to be. The ambulance ride to Baptist Hospital was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and the low voice of a paramedic checking Richard's vitals. He'd swallowed a lot of water, and there was concern about his lungs, about shock, about the stress on a heart that had already been through enough in one lifetime. But physically, he would be fine. It was everything else that felt broken. Maya wasn't in the ambulance. She had no reason to be. She was catering staff, a stranger who happened to be standing close enough to dive in. But when Eleanor Cross arrived at the hospital an hour later and found Richard sitting up in a hospital bed, staring silently at the wall, the first thing he asked was whether anyone had checked on the woman who saved him. She went home, Richard, Eleanor said gently. She gave a statement to police and went home. She has a shift tomorrow, apparently. Some other event. Richard's jaw tightened. She jumped into the water in her work uniform to save a man she'd never met, and then she went to work the next day like nothing happened. People like that don't always know how to accept help themselves, Eleanor said quietly. Especially the kind that comes with a lot of zeros attached. Richard turned to look at her. Find her. Please, Eleanor. I need to talk to her. What Eleanor found, over the following 2 days, painted a picture that would change everything Richard thought he understood about the world he'd built around himself. Maya Reyes was 26 years old, born in Miami to a mother who'd immigrated from the Dominican Republic and a father who left before Maya turned 4. She'd been accepted into nursing school 5 years earlier, a full scholarship, top of her waitlist class, but had to withdraw in her second semester when her mother was diagnosed with early-stage kidney disease and needed full-time care that the family couldn't otherwise afford. Since then, Maya had worked 3 jobs simultaneously: overnight shifts at a diner in Hialeah, weekend catering work through a temp staffing agency, and part-time hours at a pharmacy near her apartment, filling in wherever the schedule allowed. She sent nearly every dollar she made toward her mother's dialysis copays and the rent on the small 2-bedroom apartment they shared. She hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. She hadn't been on a date in almost as long. Neighbors described her as quiet, hardworking, the kind of person who'd help carry your groceries up 3 flights of stairs without being asked and then wave off any thanks. She's exactly what she looked like on that dock, Eleanor told Richard on the 3rd day, sitting in the chair beside his hospital bed. Somebody who jumps in because nobody else will. Richard was quiet for a long moment. And Vanessa? Eleanor's expression darkened. That's the part you're not going to like. The man in the grey suit, caught by security before he could leave the property, turned out to be a private investigator named Daniel Ferro, hired 6 weeks earlier. Not by Vanessa's enemies. By Vanessa herself, along with someone else. Her brother, Marcus Cole, a man with significant gambling debts and a history of financial fraud charges that had, mysteriously, never resulted in a conviction. The recording Daniel had captured wasn't intended as evidence against Vanessa. It was insurance, footage meant to be used, if needed, to support a very different story. That Richard, in a moment of confusion or medical distress, had accidentally rolled off the dock himself, and that Vanessa had bravely, tragically, tried and failed to save him. Police records obtained over the following days revealed something far darker. 6 weeks before the engagement party, Vanessa had quietly met with a life insurance broker to increase a policy Richard didn't know existed. One taken out shortly after their engagement, naming Vanessa as sole beneficiary, worth $12 million. She had also, 3 weeks earlier, contacted a probate attorney to inquire, hypothetically, about how quickly an estate could be settled if a fiancé passed away before a wedding took place, versus after. It wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty on that dock. It was a plan, built slowly, patiently, over months. A plan that very nearly worked, and would have worked, if not for a maid in an oversized purple uniform who couldn't stand still while someone drowned. Richard sat with all of this information in silence for a long time after Eleanor finished explaining it. Outside his hospital window, Miami's skyline glittered against the night, indifferent to everything that had almost happened beneath it. 3 years ago, he finally said. After the accident, I used to think the wheelchair was the worst thing that ever happened to me. That it made me less of a man. Less worth loving. He looked down at his hands. Vanessa made me feel like maybe that wasn't true. Turns out she just needed me alive long enough to sign the right paperwork. Richard. I'm not looking for sympathy, Eleanor. He shook his head slowly, and something in his expression shifted, not toward despair, but toward something clearer, harder, more resolved. I'm looking for the address of the woman who jumped into that water without knowing a single thing about me except that I needed help. Maya's apartment in Little Havana was small. 1 bedroom for her mother, a pull-out couch in the living room for herself, a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people to stand in at once. It smelled like her mother's cooking and the eucalyptus oil Maya rubbed into her own aching shoulders after long shifts. It was nothing like the mansion Richard Halloway had grown up mourning the loss of feeling in. 3 days after the party, there was a knock at the door. Maya's mother, Carmen, answered it, wrapped in a housecoat, her face pale from another rough dialysis session that morning. Standing in the hallway was a tall, silver-haired woman in a sharp emerald suit, holding a leather folder. Is this the residence of Maya Reyes? Eleanor Cross asked politely. Carmen's eyes widened with the particular wariness of someone who had learned, through hard experience, that well-dressed strangers rarely brought good news. Who's asking? My name is Eleanor Cross. I'm an attorney representing Richard Halloway. I believe your daughter saved his life a few nights ago. Maya appeared behind her mother, still in her diner uniform from the overnight shift she'd just finished, dark circles under her eyes. Is he okay? Is Mr. Halloway all right? He's recovering, Eleanor said, and something in her expression softened at the genuine worry in Maya's voice, the worry of someone who hadn't thought, even once, about what saving a billionaire might do for her own life. He'd like to see you, if you're willing. He has some things he wants to say to you in person. Maya hesitated. She thought about her shift tomorrow, about the pharmacy job the day after, about the version of her life where wealthy men in hospital beds didn't send lawyers to her front door. I don't need anything from him, she said quietly. I did what anyone would have done. Eleanor's expression turned gently skeptical. With respect, Ms. Reyes, I watched the footage from that doc. 200 people did not do what you did. 1 person did. Carmen placed a hand on her daughter's arm. Mija, she said softly, in Spanish, go. It costs you nothing to hear the man out. 2 days later, Maya sat in a private room at Baptist Hospital, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching Richard Halloway, pale, tired, but alert, study her from his hospital bed with an intensity that made her want to shrink into the corner. I don't know how to properly thank someone for saving my life, he said finally. I've tried writing it down about 6 different ways over the past 2 days, and everything sounds hollow. Money feels hollow. It feels like paying you for a favor instead of thanking you for something that can't actually be repaid. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Halloway. Richard. Please. Maya nodded slowly. Richard. You don't owe me anything. I saw someone drowning. I jumped in. That's not a transaction. No, Richard agreed. It's not. Which is exactly why I want to do something about it, not as payment, but because I have spent the last 2 days learning who you are, Maya Reyes, and what your life actually looks like, and I cannot, in good conscience, go back to my life and pretend I don't know. Maya's jaw tightened slightly. You had someone look into me. I did. I'm not going to apologize for that. His voice was steady, kind, but firm. You gave up your nursing scholarship to take care of your mother's medical bills. You work 3 jobs. You haven't taken a day off in longer than I can find record of. And on the worst night of my life, when 200 people who claimed to care about each other stood frozen at the edge of a dock, you were the only one who moved. Maya looked away, uncomfortable with the weight of being seen so completely by a stranger. I want to cover your mother's medical care, Richard continued. Fully. I want to fund the remainder of your nursing degree, wherever you'd like to finish it. And I want to offer you a position, a real one, not charity, managing patient services for a foundation I'm restarting in my late wife's name, one that's been sitting dormant for 3 years because I didn't have the energy to run it myself. Maya's eyes snapped up, startled. Your late wife. Something flickered across Richard's face, old grief, carefully held. Eleanor didn't tell you. Her name was Sarah. She died 8 years ago, before my accident. Ovarian cancer. She spent the last year of her life volunteering at a free clinic in Overtown, insisting that people shouldn't have to choose between rent and medicine. He looked down at his hands. After she died, I built a foundation in her name and then let it go dormant, because running it made her absence too loud to ignore. Vanessa never asked about it once, in 2 years. Not once. Maya sat in silence for a long moment. I'm not asking you to be grateful, Richard said quietly. I'm asking you to consider that maybe the reason you jumped into that water wasn't an accident of instinct. Maybe it's just who you are. And I'd like to build something with someone who's actually like that, instead of someone who only pretended to be. Section 6. Maya didn't say yes that day. She told Richard she needed time to think, and he respected that, though Eleanor privately admitted she'd never seen him wait so patiently for anything in his life. Over the following 2 weeks, while Vanessa Cole's arrest made headlines across every local news station, attempted murder charges, along with fraud and conspiracy counts against both her and her brother Marcus, whose gambling debts had apparently financed the entire scheme, Maya continued working her 3 jobs as though nothing had changed. She still clocked in at the diner at 11 at night. She still filled prescriptions at the pharmacy on weekends. She still spent her evenings sitting beside her mother's dialysis chair, holding her hand through the long, tired hours. But something had shifted, quietly, beneath the surface of her routine. She kept thinking about the moment she'd looked into the water and seen a man sinking, and how it hadn't felt like a choice at all, it had felt like the only possible thing to do. She kept thinking about Richard's question on the dock. Why did you jump when nobody else moved? And she kept turning over an answer she hadn't said out loud, not fully. Because 5 years earlier, it had been Maya sinking, in a different way. The year her nursing scholarship fell apart, the year her mother's diagnosis turned their small stable life upside down overnight, Maya remembered standing in a hospital hallway just like the one Richard now recovered in, watching doctors debate whether her mother's insurance would cover a treatment that might save her kidneys, feeling completely, utterly invisible to a system that had no interest in saving people who couldn't pay. Nobody had jumped in for her, back then. She'd had to become her own rescue. Maybe that was why she couldn't watch someone else drown without doing the same for them. 3 weeks after the party, Maya visited Richard at his home in Coconut Grove, the first time she'd seen the estate outside the wreckage of that terrible night. The dock had been repaired. The string lights were gone. The wheelchair he used now was a newer model, sleeker, one his physical therapist had recommended after the accident reignited his motivation for aggressive rehabilitation. I've been thinking about your offer, Maya said, sitting across from him on the terrace overlooking the water. And I want to finish my nursing degree. Not because you're paying for it, because it's mine to finish, and I never stopped wanting it. And I'll help run the foundation, on one condition. Richard leaned forward slightly, intrigued. Name it. I don't want it to just write checks, Maya said. I want it to actually go into neighborhoods like the one I grew up in and find people who are drowning quietly, the way my mother was, the way I was, before they end up in an emergency room with no options left. I want it to catch people before they fall, not just pull them out after. Richard studied her for a long moment, something like admiration settling into his expression. Sarah would have loved that idea, he said quietly. She always said the clinic in Overtown was a band-aid on a wound that needed real surgery. She wanted to build something bigger. She just ran out of time. Then let's build it, Maya said. For her. And for people like my mother. Richard extended his hand across the table, and Maya shook it, and something about the gesture, simple, businesslike, but carrying the weight of everything that had happened since that night on the dock, felt like the true beginning of the story, more than the accident, more than the party, more than the water itself. Over the following months, the Sarah Holloway Foundation reopened its doors with Maya Reyes as its new Director of Patient Services. She brought in nurses she'd trained alongside, social workers who understood exactly what it meant to fall through the cracks of a system built for people who never had to worry about falling. Within its first year, the foundation covered medical debt for over 300 families in Miami-Dade County, funded 12 nursing scholarships for students exactly like the person Maya used to be, and opened a satellite clinic 2 blocks from the diner where Maya had once worked overnight shifts. Vanessa Cole was sentenced to 18 years for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Her brother received 12. Neither of them ever saw a single dollar of the insurance payout they'd planned so carefully to collect. And Richard Holloway, 2 years after that night on the dock, stood, with careful, hard-won steps, thanks to relentless physical therapy he now approached with an urgency he hadn't had before, at the edge of a rebuilt dock overlooking the same water that had almost taken his life, and asked Maya Reyes, who had by then finished her nursing degree and become far more than an employee in his life, whether she'd consider staying by his side for something far bigger than a job. She said yes. Not because of the money. Not because of the mansion or the foundation or the life that came with his name. She said yes because somewhere between diving into cold water for a stranger and building something meaningful out of the wreckage that followed, she'd learned the truth her whole life had been quietly teaching her all along. The people worth loving aren't the ones who look the most polished standing at the edge of the water. They're the ones who jump in when everyone else stays frozen, and the ones who remember, forever, who did. If this story moved you even a little, I'd love for you to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder today that kindness, real, unglamorous, unpaid kindness, is still the most powerful force in this world. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.